Great. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us here at the RTA. My name is Alex Wiggins, and I'm honored to be the Chief Executive Officer at the New Orleans Regional Transit Authority. This is our first ever Black History Month celebration, and looking specifically through a lens of achieving transit equity. So thank you for joining this Transit Equity Forum. I'm very thankful to our federal partners for joining us today and making time in your very, very busy schedules. So as we really begin to dissect what equity means in transportation, I really want to follow up on a quote that I heard from our president on Monday. And he said that in order to heal, you must remember. In order to heal, you must remember. And that really is what is driving this initiative across the country to achieve equity in everything we do. Now, President Biden was speaking, of course, to the experience we all endured during this past year with COVID. But you can apply that to issues of injustice and race and bias as well. And so everything that we are doing here at the New Orleans RTA moving forward will really take that equity lens into context. And I want to make it very, very, very personal. I consider myself extremely fortunate that I have the opportunity to lead a transit agency in a community in which I grew up. And New Orleans in 2021 is an incredibly progressive, advanced, bias-free city in terms of its official policy. But if we dial that back a few generations, my grandparents did not enjoy the same level of mobility that I do today. And if I take it back even further, our ferry terminal was a location where slaves were traded. And so we know for a fact that there are structures that we continue to have to make certain we're direct in our efforts to deconstruct those barriers that interfered with equity for everyone. And so when I think of transportation equity, I think of, regardless of demographic, regardless of the neighborhood, regardless of income, can we provide equal service, the same level of service and the same level of mobility that someone who lives in a family with a car would have? And so we're going to have a wonderful discussion. We have an incredible panel to dive into this conversation today. And let me introduce the panelists, and we'll dive right into this discussion. First, I'd like to introduce Mr. Christopher Coase. Christopher Coase serves as the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary for Transportation Policy in the Office of the Assistant Secretary for Transit Policy at the United States Department of Transportation. Mr. Coase previously served as Vice President for Land Use and Development at Smart Growth America. He's a Senior Fellow at the Brookings Institute and currently a professor at George Washington University and Deputy Director and Senior Advisor for the Transportation for America campaign. I had the honor of meeting Mr. Coase last year in DC when we were actually talking about commuter rail. How do we begin to look at additional modes of transit we can introduce to the Gulf Coast? And it was just a fantastic conversation. I'm really honored to be able to introduce a mentor to me and definitely a legend in our transit industry. And that is Acting Administrator at the FTA, Nuria Fernandez, who was recently appointed by the Biden administration in January of 2021. Ms. Fernandez has more than 25 years of experience, more than 35 years of experience in the transit industry, and has made herself an inspiring leader across the entire industry. She comes to the FTA after serving as General Manager and CEO of the Santa Clara Valley Transportation Authority, VTA. And prior to leading VTA, Acting Administrator Fernandez served in leadership positions at some of the busiest transit agencies in America, including the Chief Operating Officer at the New York MTA, Senior Vice President of Design and Construction at the Chicago CTA, and of course, working at the Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Authority consecutively. She also served as Commissioner for the Chicago Department of Aviation, overseeing the O'Hare and Midway airports. Fernandez was appointed as Acting Federal Transit Administrator by President Bill Clinton many years ago, where she enabled the administration of more than $1 billion in annual grant funding to deliver that to local communities for planning, design, and construction of new and expanding rail and bus systems. She also served most recently as the chair of APTA, the American Public Transportation Association, from 2019 to 2020, and on the boards of the Mineta Transportation Institute, the Transportation Learning Center, and the executive committee of the Transportation Research Board. I can tell you that Administrator Fernandez is certainly a legend in this industry, and we're very fortunate to have her join us today in this panel. And then finally, I'd like to introduce my boss, the chairman of the RTA Board of Commissioners, Mr. Flozell Daniels. I consider myself to be one of the most fortunate CEOs in the country because my boss is also a CEO in his private life. And we are just fantastic partners in developing policy and solving the day-to-day issues that come up at the RTA. And so I'm very thankful that he's able to participate today. Mr. Flozell Daniels serves as the chairman of the RTA Board of Commissioners, and he actually has an incredible amount of experience. He currently serves as the president and CEO of the Louisiana Foundation in his civilian capacity, and he also serves as the ex officio and policy committee chair of the Urban League of Greater New Orleans on their board of directors. Mr. Flozell Daniels is a founding member and board chairman of the Orleans Public Education Network. He's a mayoral appointed commissioner, of course, to the RTA. Also, the Supreme Court Chief Justice appointee to the Louisiana Public Defenders Board, a founding member of the Greater New Orleans Funders Network, steering committee member of the first of its kind ever New Orleans White House Local Resource Network, an advisory member of the Resilience NOLA 100 Resilient Cities Initiative, and has served as a commissioner of the Mayor's Working Group on Criminal Justice Reform. So we have a phenomenal panel today, and we're going to dive deeply into this discussion of equity. And I'm going to hand it over now to Mr. Flozell Daniels.
Fantastic. Thanks, Alex. I really appreciate it. And thanks to our illustrious panel members for joining us. So I'm going to give a few remarks just by way of the history, because New Orleans has such an exceptional history by way of this transit equity conversation. And then we're going to turn back to Alex and Christopher and Nuria so that we can hear firsthand. I'm going to ask some questions about what does transit equity mean for us in 2021 and what are these opportunities? This past year, our nation has experienced a collective reckoning with the lingering impacts of institutional racism, and in particular, its impacts on communities of color. More than ever, we've seen words like equity and inclusion, diversity and privilege discussed in every industry and sector in the country, and certainly transit has been a critically important part of that. The city of New Orleans has a storied past regarding equity in transit. Our streetcars were segregated from their founding in the 1800s. A few separate cars with stars were designated for Black people. They became known as star cars. It wasn't until a riot that the cars were integrated, only to be segregated until the separate but equal state law in 1902. Interestingly, the segregation on New Orleans buses and streetcars ultimately ended in 1958 when the renowned Reverend A.L. Davis and NAACP lawyer A.P. Turo filed suit against the New Orleans Public Service Incorporated, which is the body that held transit at the time, and the city. A quick note there, A.P. Turo's grandson is now vice chair of the New Orleans Regional Transit Authority Board and also chair of our finance committee. And so you see that leadership coming back around generations later to ensure equity even now. Skelly Wright, a federal district judge, ordered NOPSI to remove the race screens that separated white and colored passengers. The decision was announced on a Friday at midnight when workers at the Canal Street maintenance facility destroyed the race screens with police supervision. The next morning, the New Orleans transit system was officially integrated. The residents of the city have faced many challenges in equity since the introduction of public transit through its many iterations. As we move forward, we know it's really important to understand our history and to strive to ensure that the mistakes of the past have no chance of being repeated. As you've heard from Alex, transit equity is the driving force behind the decision of the RTA to bring all of its operations in-house. The board understood the importance of transit and the role it plays in the viability of families in the region. We are excited about the intentional, culturally appropriate community engagement conducted by the RTA to understand and meet our ridership needs. The board will always prioritize our riders first as we develop policies, implement service, and innovate to meet the needs of our community. And so March marks the end of the first quarter of the New Orleans Regional Transit Authority fully managing its administration and operations of the agency in-house. For the first time in our history, all rail and bus operations are managed directly by the RTA, increasing its direct employees, as was mentioned earlier, from 70 administrative staff to over 800 employees across maintenance, operations, and administrative roles. As the agency moves forward, our focus remains solely on our riders and the importance of providing mobility solutions that are fair and equitable. And with the support of our city, state, and federal partners, and the leadership of our public, and particularly our riding public, we can ensure that transit can meet and exceed the needs of our community. As I mentioned earlier, it has been a privilege on behalf of this board of directors to serve with Alex and his incredible team. And I'm going to turn this back over to our CEO, Alex Wiggins, who has been in the transit industry for more than 25 years, has come back home to us after working across the country, providing excellent transit leadership in many other cities to really bring us into the 21st century. He has done a yeoman's job so far in not only moving our administration and operation forward, but bringing a strong sense of local leadership and equity framework to the work. So Alex, I'm going to turn it back over to you so that you can share with us a bit about what we're accomplishing and what our vision is from RTA's perspective. And then I'll also check in with Christopher and Nuria.
Thank you so much, Flozell. And so I really want to focus on how we are partnering with our federal partners to really achieve the vision of equity across all modes of not just transportation, but all sectors in our society. It's just fantastic to have the support at the federal level to do that. And so I really want to talk about two basic areas that we're focusing in at the RTA. One is we're applying what's called, it's an RSGI initiative, a Race and Social Justice Toolkit. Applying that toolkit to decision-making that affects everything that we do at the RTA. How we provide transit service, how we do business and who we do business with, how we recruit and promote and retain employees, how do we identify career pathways for employees, and how we engage with the public. And that toolkit really requires that we ask a number of very specific questions around demographics, around issues of race and ethnicity, around issues of income and mobility, and see how decisions that we make here at the RTA impact those particular areas. What our vision is to deliver the type of transit service that removes all barriers, and provides equal access to education, to employment, and to all of the richness that the city has to offer. And so if you live in a neighborhood that doesn't have transit service, that operates on a more frequent basis, that's something that we have to take a very hard look at to ensure that someone who lives in a neighborhood that may be a transit desert has this very same access to all of the richness of the city as a family does with a car. And so that race and social justice toolkit will be applied to all major decisions that we make here at the RTA. The next area is really focused directly on transit service. I'm really happy to report our partnership with the New Orleans Regional Planning Commission and our partners at Jefferson Parish Transit and St. Bernard as well. What we're looking at are these transit deserts. Are there areas where we have frequency less than, let's say, 15, 20 minutes headway? Are there neighborhoods where we have headways as great as an hour, 30 minutes and beyond? How do we actually take direct action to address that head on to provide the level of mobility that will actually make it easier to access employment and access jobs. And so this project is called New Links. It's in its final stages. Our board of directors were briefed earlier in the week, and we look forward to partnering again with the Regional Planning Commission and our transit agency partners to increase that mobility. So let's take that headway. Instead of it being 30 minutes to an hour, let's take that headway to 10 to 15 minutes. Let's make sure that the overwhelming majority of neighborhoods in the greater New Orleans region has access to transit within a quarter mile or half mile, that we don't have transit deserts. And I know I grew up riding transit. My father was a United States Marine, and we have one car in the family. And you can imagine who drove that car. And so transportation, public transit was absolutely critical to my success, critical to access to education and access to employment. So as we look at transit equity, we're going to focus in those areas, a laser beam focus on ensuring that we can provide that equitable access to all of the opportunities that actually help to support the American dream. And so our partners at the federal level are tuned right in there. I understand that Secretary Buttigieg, that is his priority as well. And we are aligned to support that as wonderful partners. And so I think we're now ready to hear from our panelists. Again, we have two phenomenal federal partners that we're going to hear from along with our board chair. And I'm going to kick it back over to you, Flozel.
Fantastic. Thanks, Alex, for sharing some of the work that we're doing from a transit equity perspective. We're going to kick this right off and go right to you, Christopher Coase, with a question. Part of our thinking about this is really thinking about the entire community from a policy perspective. And as we think about workforce and families being pushed out of the center of cities due to gentrification, how's the Biden administration thinking about how transit agencies can quickly meet shifting transit needs of transit-dependent populations across regions that may look different than just the core of the city?
Mr. Daniels and Mr. Wiggins, thank you for the opportunity to join this conversation. And it's always amazing when I get to share the screen with the indelible acting administrator Fernandez. As you know, she is a legend in the space. Again, I am Christopher Coase, serving as the acting assistant secretary for transportation policy at DOT. And just to break it down, my chief role is to recommend to the secretary and to the larger administration on how to create a safe, reliable, and resilient transportation system that meets a triple bottom line perspective. How do we achieve climate resilience? How do we achieve safety? How do we actually infuse racial equity in all of our work? And my role working with my team is to make sure that through all of our modes, working, of course, closely with FTA, with Acting Administrator Fernandez, as well as highways, as well as our ports, as well as our motor coach, to ensure that all the policies that are coming out of DOT meets that threshold. And I'm really excited to say that Secretary Buttigieg has come on and really taking President Biden's commitment to Build Back Better seriously. And to your question, how is DOT moving the case of recognizing that right now in the market, their families today are seeing the market pressure of living in communities of opportunity, right? The idea that you can live close to your job, to healthcare, to valuable services, turns out there's a price premium for that, right? And oftentimes we see that close to our transit access. The approach that we're taking at DOT is a three-pronged approach. First and foremost, we recognize that we are in a pandemic. And one of the things that we have seen through the data is that now is not the time to underfund and stop supporting transit. And as you'll see through our rescue plan, we have a bold and robust appeal for funding to not only ensure that our transit systems are adequately funded, but we're also protecting the workers that are keeping our systems running. And so that's one of the things I would definitely say that we are very bullish about, and we believe full-heartedly that should be included as part of the rescue plan that's being considered in Congress. The second media strategy is oftentimes these conversations, when we think about expansion for transit specifically, oftentimes we focus just on the infrastructure. We do not talk about where are the housing impacts, where are the community impacts, where are the climate impacts. And as you may be aware, we are very committed in looking at a whole suite of resources that are sitting at DOT, whether through our TOD planning grant program, as well as looking at additional resources that can actually be provided not only to the transit agencies, but also to local government and community organizations to really think through our transit and housing and climate strategies. One of the things I, as many of you know, prior to my role at DOT, I work very closely with community groups across the country to develop equitable development strategies. This is something that Secretary Buttigieg is very interested in doing, as well as the president, and we will be committed to try to work and bring those resources to community groups, to transit agencies to come together and work on these strategies together. And last but not least, President Biden has committed to what is called the Justice 40 initiative. As we think about these investments, whether it's transit, whether it's climate mitigation, we recognize that we can't just be thinking about it in the sense of, yes, it's going to improve our economy. Yes, it will make our air cleaner and give people greater access. But the question is, who is getting access? Who is getting the benefit? And as part of the Justice 40 commitment, is ensuring that every dollar that we spend, whether it's through transit funding, whether it's through climate funding, we're making sure that 40% of those resources are either spent in underserved communities or benefit underserved communities. So in those three, very simple, very quick, these are things that we are undertaking right now. And if I have to round it out as someone who says you never stop with threes if you can go to the cross, I would tell you that we are also, President Biden just released an executive order 13985, and it's our racial equity order. And as it was mentioned earlier, sometimes, when we talk about racial equity, we get quick in terms of just doing things. We are taking a very methodical approach to actually assess what has happened. We are right now taking a government whole approach and looking at every policy, both internal to DOT, also as external in terms of the funding that we give out, and asking a simple question. What has the harm been in the past? What is the harm that is happening right now? And then further, later on, working with community groups, working with transit agencies like RTA to ask ourselves, how can we build back better? How can we create a DOT, working with our sister agencies like HUD, EPA, Army Corps of Engineers, and the like? How can we ensure that when we are bringing new resources, bringing new capacity to communities, we're doing it in a way that achieves those three pillars: safety, climate resilience, and truly a racial inclusive government. So I'll stop there.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Christopher. I appreciate it. I'm going to turn it to Acting Administrator Nuria Fernandez, who can first share with us about the role the Federal Transit Administration plays in working with cities like New Orleans.
Well, good afternoon to all of you, and thank you so much, Fozell. I think this is a terrific opportunity, and I really appreciate that you and our esteemed Executive Director, Alex Wiggins, CEO, facilitating this conversation. I also want to take this opportunity to say thank you to my colleague, Christopher Close, for joining me today. He's leading this effort at the U.S. Department of Transportation, and all modal agencies are coming together so that we can deliver for cities and for communities a holistic approach to the President's priorities and our Secretary's mission and goals. So first, I'd like to say that we greatly appreciate the commitment from RTA and all of our transit providers during these unprecedented times. I take my hat off to you, Alex, because I know that you, together with the hundreds of colleagues around the country, have been moving people when everything else stood still. And that is the value of public transportation, that we're there for we're an essential service there for all of the essential workers. And you've done so safely and efficiently, so thank you. Transit workers have been on the front lines. Some have been sick and have lost lives. We're keeping tally on that. But overall, the transit workforce has shown up. So that is, essential workers can continue to show up as well. So the commitment is truly remarkable, and I could not let that go without stating. The transit authorities have also had to grapple with both not only the human and budgetary impacts of this pandemic. For many, relief was slow in coming. Now, with both the federal mask mandate and our effort to get the relief money out the door as quickly as we can, we hope that you'll once again see the federal government as a partner to you during one of the greatest national challenges of our lives. So this week, the House is also advancing the American Rescue Plan, which we would provide additional relief for transit. And we need Congress to pass this plan as quickly as possible because we want to keep transit systems running and also to help continue that debate about the pandemic, about safety, about social distancing and masking. So I am very interested to hear, Flozell, your recap about Nolans and the RTA's history and the efforts on the way to expand transit to reach more members of your community. Thanks for sharing, Alex, and I know you'll talk some more about this, about the transit deserts, which we have to eradicate. The New Links plan focuses on providing more transit access to more people. So it's going to improve service for residents who live in poverty and for households without cars. And it's ambitious and impressive, but I know that you have a plan, a path forward to make it so. Building transportation hubs, introducing bus rapid transit and expanding transit urban development are all excellent strategies so that we can continue to improve that access, provide that mobility solution, and but do so in an equitable way. And as you continue to promote equity for residents across the board in this New Orleans region, we'll be right there with you as a partner. So to truly address inequities in the transportation system, bus rapid transit needs to include elements. It just can't be a bus rapid transit banner. It needs to include dedicated bus lanes. It needs to have transit signal priority, along with considerations of land use and other determinations that are made by cities that transit agencies do not have the authority on land use, but working with cities. Why is this important? As we're talking about equity, it doesn't matter if there's millions of dollars invested in a bus rapid transit, if that bus is going to stop every few minutes at a red light. And someone can then make the determination if they should just go ahead and drive because they can get there faster. So you start to see inequity in the conveyance, the ability of individuals who may not have a choice to feel that not only are they getting something new, but they're getting something new that's equal or better than driving. So that is really the impetus behind how we start closing these gaps with this major federal investment coming into communities. RTA's vision is particularly relevant to learn about during Black History Month, and that's why this conversation is so appropriate. When we remember the racial challenges of our past, and you, Flozell, have clearly delineated what that was and have taken us back in history so we don't repeat it, we also need to look forward of how we take those lessons, work together, and promote a more just future for all. You know, the Biden-Harris administration is committed to equity. We heard my colleague, Christopher Coase, made reference to the executive order that was signed by President Biden, and it was one of his first acts. This happened on the first day that he took office because this is important to him and it's important to our nation. So as we look at how we at USDOT are going to be advancing the premise of that executive order and looking at racial equity and support of underserved communities, because we recognize that racism and discrimination in our economy, in our laws and institutions have stifled opportunities for too many families of color for too long. So we're looking, public transportation is a great equalizer, but as we say, it's a great equalizer because it doesn't matter who you are, what you look like, and what you do for a living, you're welcome aboard. We also recognize that access to public transportation is still unequal. So it's not enough to say we have 500 buses. It's where are those buses, where do they start, where do they end, which communities they're actually touching, and are those communities rich with opportunities for those who have not had access to them in the past. And then of course, more importantly, it's the quality of the service, is the quality of the experience that then starts to talk about how we are leveling that playing field. Yes, we want to provide access to jobs, education, services, opportunities. We want to lift up people so that they have a better circumstance and they can lift up the entire community. But we have to be very thoughtful. It's not just drawing lines on a map. It's drawing lines that are going to make a difference, lines that are going to transform. not continue doing more of the same. And that's why President Biden has said to all of us, he has challenged us to build back better, not just build back. So I look forward to working very closely with you and your sharing some of the experiences that I'll be gleaning from your colleagues around the country, so that we can help New Orleans get to where it wants to go. We want you to hit that goalpost. We want you to meet your goals and be able to turn back and say, this is the legacy that this time and this moment has allowed us to achieve. So with that, I would like to now pause. I have many more things I could talk about, but I know that there's some interest in getting to some of the questions.
Well, I have to tell you, both you and Christopher Nuria prove why we've been so excited to have this conversation. And quite frankly, why we're so excited about this moment in history with regard to where the leadership is, folks with both practical experience, with an aspiration for not only excellence, but equity. And your opening comments and words so far really give us a lot of motivation in that way. Someone famous once said, luck favors the prepared. And we at the RTA, like many agencies across the country, have been getting prepared for this moment, this opportunity to work with our partners across the nation and certainly here in the region to make the most of what we have so that we can bring a transit equity opportunity to our riders. I'll pick up on the question that I've asked Christopher already. I got out the gate there really fast ahead of myself, but I want to bring this back to you, Nuria, if I could, particularly about this question of transit dependent riders and regional challenges and ways of, you've been on the ground before and have had to navigate these issues. What's the opportunity for us to think about regional equity as a part of this transit equity conversation?
When you're thinking about regional equity, it's important to understand why there was an inequity. And aside from policies that were intentional, once we've moved away from these were intentional policies that have now been eradicated, but we're still finding that inequity. It's then looking at policies that are outside of your control. And I made reference to cities have land use authority. Cities map out master agreements on how they want to see themselves develop. And it's in who is at the table, not sitting against the wall or outside of a door, but it's being at the table to ensure that public transportation is not an afterthought, which has been our challenges for decades. And I keep mentioning that this is the moment. When I left DOT back, I remember it well, it was January 16, 2001. That was 20 years ago. I walked out of DOT and of the FTA. And that year, that fiscal year, our budget was $6 billion. I come back 20 years later, it's $13 billion. And because of COVID and the devastating effect it has had on public transit, we have received two significant emergency relief funding. First was the CARES Act, 25 billion, and then immediately followed by 14 billion of CRISA funds. And now there is possibility of another 30 billion in this recovery plan. So what I'm saying is we will be moving from 13 billion to almost 80 billion in 1 year. It's unheard of. And that's why it's so important that not only we at the Federal Transit Administration be ready, but that you, as you stated, have been preparing for a moment where if there's an opportunity, that you are right there to accept that opportunity. And the challenge I present to you today is the only way you're going to get about closing the gap through at those transit deserts is being at the table. You've got funding that allows you to continue operations, but also gives you an opportunity to start thinking about the future, because this is about the operations, but also about recovery and what the future needs to look like. Don't keep spending money doing more of the same. Think about how you want to see yourself on the other side of this pandemic so that you're prepared, because we will overcome this challenge and we will be ready not only to welcome back the same level or higher of riders that you had pre-COVID. But you need to be at the table. You need to redefine those policies today so that they have you have a different path and a stronger position, stronger footing, to really close those gaps, make the opportunities available, and not just buy new and build new that goes to places where people don't want to go.
I really appreciate that. You know, Alex, as I was listening to Ms. Fernandez use that phrase, and I think Christopher said it also, build back better. It was such a mantra for us here in New Orleans after Katrina, and it resonates so much. And I'm wondering, one of the things that's been most important in our experience here locally is that in decision making, in transportation planning, in transit planning, it's those that are least likely to have the time or the resources to participate in the traditional outreach discussions. They just can't show up, and those that do participate often, if I could be so bold as saying, are often the loudest and may not be the ones most impacted by the situation. How are transit agencies rethinking community engagement, Alex? I know you've been really pushing this a lot locally and talking to your colleagues nationally about this. What are you thinking about that?
Absolutely. It's just a fantastic question because you really hit the nail right on the head. Sometimes we don't hear from the writers that we need to hear from based on the methodology and their approach to outreach. And so I know my colleagues across the country work through this challenge as well. And here at the RTA, we're really focused on taking our questions to the writer. And oftentimes that doesn't look like a traditional survey, although survey tools are fantastic. We definitely need them. Sometimes that means getting to the heart of the community, meeting with local stakeholders at church, at school, in the neighborhood, on the bus, at the bus station, to be able to hear more directly from the members of the public who rely on transportation for their mobility. You know, I often use, my family as an example. Come from a large family, everyone's very, very busy. My parents probably did not have time to attend community meetings several times a week, several times a month to provide feedback. But if we actually reach out and find folks where they are, we can actually make certain that we hear from the ridership that is most impacted. And so I think the industry is really looking at non-traditional ways of outreach and then being able to gather and then quantify that data and incorporate it into decision-making and recommendations, of course, that we would bring to the board. And then I'll take it back right to that RSGI toolkit, that race and social justice toolkit, to really being intentional and asking the types of questions that actually help us to get to that core stakeholder to make sure that their voices are absolutely heard.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. Yeah, we've been able to take this so far as to add, even as Alex frames this RSGI framework, a Writers Advisory Council that is built inside of our institutional policy, so that we have to consider how our writing public really helps us inform and think about some of our policy decisions. Mr. Coles, I'm going to come back to you with one of the things we were so excited about with regard to you and Ms. Fernandez's appointment, having folks who've not only been on the ground, but in the policy space from a progressive perspective, thinking about these issues. And one of the things that we have struggled with as a relatively small transit agency with a smaller budget and financial reserves is how to compete for recovery dollars. And we're wondering, how is the Biden administration thinking about things like waiving local match requirements and other mechanisms maybe, so that smaller agencies can not only compete for recovery dollars, but also for the other critical capital dollars that we can use to rebuild our system and build back better?
Thank you for that question. I can tell you, as part of the administration's not only racial equity executive order that we're implementing by our commitment to Justice 40, it is forcing us to ask that very question. Oftentimes, underserved communities are the very ones that can't pay for the expensive consultants to apply for a CIG or a bill grant, right? It is also these very communities or transit agencies, right, that are literally, as Acting Administrator Fernandez said, just trying to keep the buses on time, who don't have time to think about, okay, how do I do a transit-oriented development, equitable development strategy? And so those are the lived experiences that we're bringing to some of these policy debates. And I can tell you already some of the things that you hopefully over the next several weeks, you'll see as part of a larger conversation about recovery, as well as reauthorization. Those are things that we're definitely taking into account in our discussion. Also, most recently, we are being very proactive, as you might have noticed, in our recent series of NOFOs that have come out. We're intentionally trying to ensure that we are bringing these resources and the availability of these resources to many communities that may not even know about these federal resources. And so we have a very aggressive public engagement encounter as well, which actually has been true for a long time in the last 4 years. Also, most recently in our infra grant, we actually, to the previous discussion, we actually made clear for the first time, including racial equity, but specifically community engagement and working towards underserved populations. How you as a project sponsor, maybe one of privilege, how are you actually making sure that these resources, or particularly partnerships, are more diverse, are actually impacting more populations? And so that is just what we're doing out of the gate based on our current pots of dollars that we have right in front of us. But I can tell you over the next several weeks, we are developing a series of policies that speak to this. And I know you mentioned local match. I definitely would say that already a lot of the conversation has been, particularly communities that meet that Justice 40, how do we reduce the barriers for those communities to have access to federal resources? So whether it's within the CIG program, which I know I don't want to steal Administrator her thunder, but she did some really awesome things in the last couple of weeks to really show that we are intent on making sure that we're removing all the barriers for local access to these federal resources. So I stopped there because Acting Administrator definitely has a couple of key points on this one in the last week.
Well, you know, I want to go back to the community engagement because that struck a very familiar chord. And I'm going to switch hats, yes, as acting administrator, but also as a former CEO. I can tell you, my mom always said, don't ever let a crisis go to waste. And this pandemic, what it showed us is we have all moved to a virtual platform. Today is case in point. And that virtual platform allows for the flexibility that community meetings in the evenings when moms had to get dinner on the table and kids ready for school the next day and couldn't come to that community engagement event, that has now brought it into the home or into a place where they are. So we're meeting the community where it is. And for those who do not have access to technology, churches can serve that role. One of the things that I found in the Santa Clara County when we were doing our community engagement on projects and even as it related to changing service as a result of the pandemic, was that an online platform that is accessible 24 hours. So presenters present, is recorded, and anyone can access, watch it at 2 a.m. in the morning and input their questions, concerns, and get a response. So just use what you have today. I know that it's hard always to catch people. It's very unusual to find individuals who are sitting on a trolley or sitting on a bus that want to answer questions. Even if you only have 3, more likely than not, they'll say, don't bother me or not today. So just bring this opportunity to them and you'll get such a large turnout, many more comments than you would ever receive if you hosted community meetings throughout the entire in every parish for a period of 2 weeks, 24 hours. You won't get that kind of turnout, but you will online. As it relates to the issue of making it affordable. So one step that we took initially with the CARES Act and of course with CRISA, that's 100% federal funds. And that will continue until we're told to stop. But as it relates to the capital investment and the needs to either as you're responding, submitting a low-no proposal under the recent NOFO that was issued or moving forward, we are taking a very careful look at what it means, what that local match means and how much it should be. Recognizing that local match is local dollars. And a lot of communities, the majority of communities across this nation have seen a decrease in their sales tax income. And also not only at the local level, but also at the state level, and even in the motor vehicle excise tax. So that gives us an opportunity to rethink what we should be doing going forward with these large dollars that are going to be made available for infrastructure rebuilding. So stay tuned.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you both. I actually want to come back to both, if I can, Acting Administrator Fernandez and also Mr. Coase, to you. One of the questions that we got from Dillard University, one of our local and amazing HBCUs, and I know you all are looking at and working with HBCUs across the country, is this really important issue of diversity with regard to our workforce. And how is the Biden administration thinking about, or maybe developing plans to support the increasing number of underrepresented students in transportation-related fields of study, right? And Alex is making plans and developing pipelines for our workforce here. What are you all thinking at the national level, and what can we be looking for, should we be thinking about as we think about our future workforce?
I'll be happy to jump in, Christopher.
Oh, yeah, go ahead. I'll come right after. Go ahead.
Okay, so that is a subject that's near and dear to my heart because building the workforce is going to be necessary. I mean, you've heard our president. He wants to have low or no emission vehicles. And it's a very short timeline that we need to get there. We're talking about electric buses or any other types of no emission buses. And that is going to require reskilling and upskilling of our existing workforce. So I start there because that is a challenge that we are looking at solutions because we need to overcome that challenge. As it relates to the pipeline, going all the way to a senior in high school through community college and other opportunities, I think that there is such a broad number of things that can happen that can be enabled by the federal government. And that is that as part of our existing programs and as more funding is identified, we can make that training eligible, and then the transit agencies can then determine how they are going to make those connections with their local community colleges, how they're going to work with high schools, especially those in communities of concern, to create internships, to create other type of programs that bring in, expose, and educate. Most people, when they think of public transportation, they say, well, I don't want to be a bus driver. Well, the opportunities in public transportation are enormous. As Alex and you know, Flozell, it's a whole spectrum of things that individuals can do in the public transportation space. And it's just making that funding, that eligibility of the training that would give flexibility to the agencies to apply that as to what does training mean and how do we start to build that pipeline of that next generation that's going to be in transit, maintaining, driving, leading.
And just to add on to that, beyond this, the modernization or a new word, climatification of our transit fleet, we also recognize that right now USDOT has a number of relationships with what's called the University Transportation Centers that are at many universities across the country. And the Secretary has made a clear pledge that we want to make sure that these institutions also represent America. And so we are currently right now evaluating how we can, whether it's Dillard and other universities like Hampton and alike, how can we also elevate them to be qualified as Tier 1 university train station centers, but also how can we use and develop and strengthen those relationships to also not only create the new workforce, but actually create the new entrepreneurs who are creating new mobility options, right? I think there's one element of our Justice 40 initiative is that we're not just looking for the workers, we want the next great idea, right? What's the new battery that's being made that will power not only our buses, but also our trains? And so in many ways, we recognize and we respect the leadership that many historic Black colleges have already done in terms of being great institutions for not only the medical side, technological engineering, and we're going to leverage those assets so that we can meet that Justice 40 threshold. So again, I say that to say we are really excited to partner with many historical Black colleges to get them at the table and versus kind of in ways have been in the past, behind the room, waiting for someone to tell them what's going on. So that is our commitment.
Yeah, and Flozell, if I may, I know that you have some more that you want to share on this topic, but I just wanted, I would be remiss if I didn't mention that this spring, the FTA will help address that the transit worker shortages issue that we've been hearing about. We're going to be issuing a notice of funding for a center that will help develop the skilled transit workforce. Because we are with you. It's about good paying, secure jobs throughout the country, and everyone should have access to those. So our goal really is to promote more effective and efficient training of frontline workers, and particularly on the maintenance and operations side. And we're looking at programs where we can develop collaborative partnerships between management and labor. I had such a program at the Valley Transportation Authority when I was the general manager there. It was called the JWI, Joint Workforce Investment. And these are the programs that then open up opportunities for apprenticeships and give the current individuals that flexibility to move from being a bus driver to actually start to do maintenance on heavy equipment, on more refined technology, electric or electromechanical technology, more opportunities for higher pay. So I just wanted to put that out there because that will be coming out soon.
Okay, I got to jump on this one now. This is the last thing I want to say. Because I know both myself and acting administrator has our lived experience. One of the things we hope that this conversation here is a dialogue. We are thinking about these things in real time, but it's going to be very important for folks like you, university officials at Dillard, to also give us feedback. For example, our administration is reviewing a former local hire provision that allowed whether it's transit agencies or local governments to use federal resources to do local hire initiatives, to use federal resources to buy locally. And this is one of those places where if Dillard University working with RTA had some of the suggestions or ideas how we can facilitate those partnerships better, particularly as it pertains to workforce development, that is a place I would say, either call me or send an email to us. We're listening and we want to be a resource. We also want to be listening as well. So I'll stop there.
No, I love it. When Alex decided to put this together, part of what we wanted to do was to have exactly this kind of dialogue so there could be a shared learning opportunity. I'll quickly say before I turn to Alex on the question, I'm really excited about the climate discussion because there are some really beautiful intersections there. Alex has already helped us start to think about it. I sit on the governor's climate task force here in Louisiana, one of the first in the Deep South, talking about being greenhouse gas emissions free by 2050, the same goals that the Biden administration has set forth. Mm-hmm. And we think transportation plays a critically important role forward to not only hearing more about that, we will take you up on that, Christopher, by engaging with you all as well as the FTA directly, as well as this workforce conversation. The first thing Alex said to me when he came in as CEO was, I first want to invest in our people. That's our biggest opportunity, is our people, the ones we have and the ones that are coming. And we still think that's our most important work. Alex, one of the things that we've been thinking about locally, and I know you've been discussing with your colleagues nationally, is the importance of transit-oriented development. Not only thinking about transit, but thinking about housing and jobs and education. And we certainly have a phenomena along high-frequency transit routes where there's a bit of NIMBYism and a reluctance to accept the development of more affordable housing along those routes where affordability does exist or should exist or more should exist. So it's been stymied a bit. What else can we do to make basic changes from this perspective? What should we be thinking about and what kind of supports do we need to make that happen?
Another great question. I really think it's about educating the community as a whole, in particular, those communities that may be resistant to the types of projects that connect transit to affordable housing. And the whole concept of transit-oriented communities, essentially, is really bringing together all of those resources and all of those entities that complement transit experience while maintaining housing affordability. And I'll look across the country at a number of examples. If we take a look at what's happening right now in Los Angeles, where large affordable housing communities are being built on the transit footprint in cooperation with the transit property. If we look at the early work that occurred in Portland with TriMet, at Sound Transit in Seattle, and Denver, incredible projects that were able to solve a couple of different problems. Increase mobility for communities that were essentially transit deserts, and build affordable housing so the historic residents of those communities can stay in those communities and can afford to stay in those homes. And so we're having really good conversations, the beginning of those conversations with our partners at the city right now, to really look at the opportunities throughout New Orleans to begin to educate the public as to how this can benefit all. We know it's going to have a direct impact on access to employment, on access to education, and improving overall quality of life. As you bring in other retail providers, now we're not just talking food deserts and a lack of affordable housing. Now we're talking about, addressing the food desert issue and making sure we can partner with the type of establishments that bring all of that together. So I would think that our first challenge in New Orleans is to really educate the public, partner with the public on focusing on intentional efforts to improve overall quality of life.
Fantastic. And we're seeing in the chat, folks asking about how can departments like Commerce, for instance, work with DOT and others across departments, both at the federal level, but certainly here locally as well, to help answer some of these questions. We think that's really important. I'm going to ask one last question. We are having such a good time with such useful information. We're getting a little close on time, but I want to ask a closing question before I turn it over to Alex, Acting Administrator Fernandez, and you, Mr. Coles, for final remarks. And that is, and this goes to the question that's in the chat here also, as we think about this work and giving thought to the really critically important role of disadvantaged businesses or DBEs and how they're included in this recovery. Here we are at the intersection of not only a transit equity crisis, but it's an economic crisis. It's a pandemic crisis. How both Ms. Fernandez and Mr. Coles, are you all thinking about the importance of DBEs and disadvantaged businesses in the context of the transportation equity conversation?
So from at least from the policy standpoint, and I know Acting Administrator Fernandez has some additional elements as well. But first and foremost, we are reviewing our existing disadvantaged business enterprise structure. First and foremost, I think you may see that we're going to change even the name to go into more of a minority business enterprise and recognizing the full totality of the ecosystem. So that's number one. Number two, as part of this racial equity EO, we are literally having an analysis of our just transportation supply chain. Who are getting contracts? How are our procurement process? And how is that being leveraged or used across the department? As you may be aware, every mode has a different structure. And so synchronizing those, again, making that earlier conversation, we can't start moving until we start asking questions like, what the heck happened? What is the harm? And how do we make sure that minority business enterprises have not only a fair shot, right, but a preferred shot to some of these contracts? In addition to that, one of the things that we are very keen on, particularly as it pertains to the recovery package and with the reauthorization discussions we're having with Congress, how can we prioritize any future dollars? How do we create new set-asides for minority business enterprises to take advantage of some of these new opportunities that are coming down the pipeline. So those are some top lines, and hopefully in the next several weeks, we'll have more detail, public details to share. But this is one of those places where I would suggest if you are a minority business enterprise, you should be reaching out to us, because we want to learn your experience. We want to know what the barriers were. What, sometimes things get hidden in a contract or within an application. And so in many ways, use this opportunity of the next several weeks to better inform us, so that as we roll out our more aggressive policy and proposals, we can make sure we're hitting the ball mark. But with that, I'll turn it over to Acting Administrator Fernandez for additional.
Yeah, I believe that, Christopher, you have really covered what not only this group needed to hear, but those who will be listening in on the recording. I think there's a lot of interest in understanding how the $1 trillion in infrastructure investment, what that will do to improve the lot of Main Street. And the minority business enterprise program that started out many decades ago, and the evolution into a disadvantaged business enterprise that also has some limitations as to how it's applied, it's an important time to review those, just to make sure that as we talk equity, it's not just in the output, but that equity involves the holistic, the ecosystem of those who are providing or who have the ability to provide and be part of this new journey with the influx in federal funds into infrastructure, that they have a seat and have the ability to sell the goods, the services that they have developed and ready to bring to market. Even though today the Disadvantaged Business Enterprise Program is very structured and very clear as to how it should be applied, communities have the opportunity, transit agencies have the opportunity to use the local match dollars to expand and broaden the access for the small businesses, the minority businesses that are part of programs that are not federally funded, so that in the overall totality, these businesses are not left behind while the federal government and its programs with billions of dollars only have the limitations as to whether it's 30%, 50%, or some match that's created based on studies that then define what that designation should be. I just love being back at DOT because we have such bright individuals like Christopher and others who are going to help us figure this out.
Fantastic. Well, I got to tell you, it has been both a privilege on behalf of the Regional Transit Authority Board of Directors. I see we've got Mark Raymond and Fred Neal and Laura Bryan on from our mayor's office, who's been a significant partner here, Mayor Latoya Cantrell, for us to be able to hear Ms. Fernandez and Mr. Coase from you, and to receive this invitation of continued partnership in advancing this work of transportation equity. It's also a privilege for us to have such an esteemed and excellent CEO as Alex Wiggins leading us and making sure that our work is moving forward. We have the privilege of really being a policy board, so we just get to focus on those things and have excellent leadership in place with an incredible team. Alex, if you would finish us up with some closing remarks, and we'll be done for the day, I think.
Certainly. Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. And again, I'd certainly invite Acting Administrator Fernandez and Assistant Secretary Coase to share their closing remarks as well. Mine will be really brief. And again, I'm going back to a quote from our president on Monday night. In order to heal, we have to remember. And that is the lens that we'll be looking through as we look at achieving equity in transportation at the RTA. And we're going to be very intentional about that to make sure that everyone has access, regardless of ethnicity, national origin, gender identity. Everyone will have equal access. And so with that, I really want to thank again my colleagues at the federal level. Your support is absolutely key to our efforts moving forward. So I'm going to pass the mic now to Acting Administrator Fernandez.
Well, again, thank you. This is such an important conversation. I am delighted to have been here, to have met you, Flozell. I know Alex, we go way back to our early days in transit. But this is transit's time. It's transit's time. And not only should we have these conversations, but we should turn the conversations into action so that we can show the communities that we are helping transforming, creating that transformation, enabling that transformation right now. My door's open, and I too welcome ideas that you all may have as we're in the early stages of the reauthorization discussion. What are things that you feel should be considered by federal government now so that you and others can see an outcome that would speak directly to your communities and the things that you're trying to do. So it's an open door, lots of interest, and we're like sponges. We'll be absorbing and taking in all of your great thoughts.
Great. Thank you so much. And Mr. Coase.
You know, it's really hard to go after Acting Administrator Fernandez. So first, ditto. Second, I wanted to say thank you to my New Orleans friends who sent me that king cake. I appreciate it. But also, I think in many ways, to echo Acting Administrator Fernandez's comments about this is our time. Having done a lot of research and working with a lot of communities like New Orleans on creating, you know, whether it's using choice neighborhoods to reimagine how public housing can be more inclusive and actually be closer to amenities. This is our moment to create equitable TOD everywhere. How can we create communities of opportunity? You know, beyond the transit or the mobility, that's what we all want. You know, it was mentioned before, you know, there are individuals who don't want to upzone or want high frequency transit. How do we change their minds? And I'm always reminded that when you talk about the pocketbook, the fact that many of Americans now, even during this crisis, are spending more money on housing and transportation, over half in many communities, even in New Orleans, where that gets a lot of eyebrows. And my goal, and I think as you've heard from today from Administrator Fernandez, is that we want to make sure that no matter who you are, where you live in this great country, the United States of America, you should be able to live in a place that's healthy, that's resilient, and that's prosperous. And by doing so, that means all of us, the federal government, being a partner to local and transit agencies, as well as working with the private sector on the front end to create community opportunity. It's going to be our call of our time. Now is the time for us to be radical in our imagination of our communities, but more importantly, why do we need to do it by block? We can go to scale today. And so we are looking forward to these conversations. We consider you partners. Please use us. We are listening. And I say, please go talk to your other regional partners, because when you can speak with one voice with a common agenda, it makes things very easy for all of us to move forward together. So again, thank you, Alex. Thank you, Falanzel. As always, Acting Administrator, it's always good to share a Zoom window with you. But again, New Orleans, it's always been a pleasure. Until next time.
Fantastic. Thank you all. This is amazing. Absolutely amazing. I'm taking those two quotes. This is transit's time. We're going to put that on a banner, really. And also, Christopher, to your point, now is the time to use our radical imagination for transit in America. This is the moment. And this has been exciting. Lots of kudos in the chats. We really appreciate both of you helping Alex and I bring this conversation to life.
Thank you.
Our pleasure.
Take care, everyone.
Take care.
See you soon.